Hi everybody, Tim here again. Thanks for coming back to the channel today. I know it has been a minute since I posted anything, but real life has gotten in the way and it do be like that sometimes. I haven't been completely idle. I would like to do a little bit of a shout out slash promo here at the beginning of this episode to my pal Dayton Johnson, who runs the Docking Bay 77 podcast. I've been a guest for him on his show several times over the last couple of years. That's been a whole lot easier than producing my own YouTube videos because basically I just show up, do my part, and then he does all the work of editing and all the posting and work that has to actually be done. And I get to go on with my life. But I figured it was time to get back to doing some stuff with the channel here, so we're back. Now, over on the podcast, if you have been listening at all, and I highly recommend you go do that because they're a lot of fun. We talk about albums and bands and some of the other people he has on. They talk movies and stuff. I'm not as big of a movie guy as them, so I just hang out for the album and music discussions. One of the things that has come up again and again when we were discussing various albums and various bands has been the synth work on a lot of these recordings, and I let it drop that I am a bit of a synth nerd myself, and so I thought, you know what, let's talk about the basics of sound synthesis. Now, this is something I have kind of let fall by the wayside over the years. I've never been what you would call an expert, but I used to know quite a bit, so I thought, let's get back into that. The first real synthesizer I had was back in 1986, and it was the Korg DW8000. This was one of the early digital analog hybrid synths. It used analog architecture, but digital storage to save your presets, and the waveforms were in a digital format, an early form of digital sound. But it was basically the same as the other analog synths. So what I wanted to do is kind of start from the ground up again and reteach myself synthesis. See what I remember from days of yore and apply that to what is available now and see what gaps I can fill in with some research on my own. I thought I'd bring you guys along for the ride. Again, I'm not an expert on any of this. I am just a guy who has some gear and likes to play around. And I thought, well, I'll take you guys with me. Maybe we can all learn something together. So the way I wanted to do this is to jump on the computer here in the house and we'll pull up a VST. I'm going to be using Vital, which is a free VST. I figured that way it's easy for all of you guys to jump on board and we can all have the same tools to work from. And we're going to just start from the basics. We're going to discuss some terminology here first in this episode. Then we're going to move on to some actual sound design, some basics. I'm not going to go everything that Vital can do. There are plenty of tutorials out there if you want to search up how to work with Vital specifically. But I wanted to talk about some of the basic elements that you're going to find in just about any analog synth, be it virtual or real world. So let's get started on some of the basic elements that you're going to find in just about any synthesizer out there. Let's go. Okay, so one of the first elements in any synthesizer sound is something called an oscillator. What is an oscillator? An oscillator is basically just a fancy word for a thing that makes a noise. This is done by producing a waveform. So when we talk about a waveform, what we're really talking about is what that shape looks like on an oscilloscope. You know, the fancy old things that you used to see in the sci-fi series back in the 60s and 70s. So the waveform is just the shape that the sound makes in amplitude through time on that little screen. Now there are just a handful of some basic waveforms that all of the early synthesizers and pretty much every synthesizer still is going to use in some shape or form. The names may have changed a little bit over the years, but they're still basically the same thing. And the first one of those is going to be the sine wave. Now, on an oscilloscope, that just looks like a curve going up and down, kind of a wave. You're going to think of flute sounds, breathy sounds, things that don't really have much of an edge to them. Sounds like this. Next up is going to be the square wave or the pulse wave. This is two terms for basically the same thing. A square wave is going to be full on 50% of the time and full off 50% of the time. Sounds like this. A pulse wave is just going to be the same thing, but you're going to change the ratio of on to off. Now the next thing we're going to talk about is a triangle wave, which sounds like this. And then lastly, you're going to talk about a sawtooth wave. So that's an oscillator, basically. And those are the waveforms that you're going to find inside an oscillator. Now, depending on the synthesizer you're using, you may have a bajillion other options for waveforms to use. But those basic ones are going to be in there, maybe called by a different name or something, but they'll be there for you to use. I think they're a great starting place for learning how to sculpt sound.